And I have now pressed the button. The meeting is being recorded, just so that we can save it for those that are not able to actually attend at this time. So anyway, with no further ado, we'll go ahead and turn the time over to Sharon.
Thanks, Jay. So I don't think any of us can deny that emergencies can and do occur on a regular basis in every life. And what we're hoping that is that as we help one another and with our neighbors helping neighbors, we can more easily mitigate and resolve some of these challenges. And we certainly welcome your suggestions to any of this plan. The plan was sent out as so that you could download it. And if you have some suggestions, we'd be happy to put them into that plan. We've all had leadership responsibilities, this poor little duck and her ducklings. At one time or another, leadership in neighborhoods, as parents, as siblings, in church positions in every way. But sometimes we don't even realize that we're in a dangerous situation. And where did my ducklings go? I have only one left. And when that emergency arises, we need to know what to do. We need to do it quickly. So it's our goal to help you to be alert to these potential dangers and to steer away from these dangers. And if unforeseen emergencies do occur, we hope to help provide you with some of the tools you'll need to deal with these crises. So please, any of you, feel free to comment as we go along. So what could happen? When we're evaluating or preparing for emergencies, the first thing we should do is to consider in a practical way what emergencies we might face in our houses, in our homes and communities. And to begin with, I'll tell you a little story of what happened to me. A few years ago, we went with our family to Hawaii, and we had 6 children and the grandma to take with us, and the youngest at the time was about 2. And I thought we were quite well prepared. And my oldest son was playing in a football game, and it was his last game of the year. And of course, he broke his arm. So he didn't tell us until the game was over and played the entire game. So I left my husband in charge of the crew at home and took Bart to the hospital, where after many hours of waiting, his arm was put into a cast. So when we got home, I still had packing to finish. We had an early morning flight, and I had sent everyone to bed and packed until 4 in the morning. And the suitcases were finally ready, and I got the alarm set so I could take a 2-hour nap before we had to leave. And when I turned off the light to go to bed, I also turned off the plug to the alarm. So needless to say, we all awakened after the plane had left. And so I frantically called the airport, and amazingly, they got us on the next plane. And I frantically grabbed our suitcases. The kids and grandma raced to the car. It was like the movie Home Alone, only worse. But as we raced into the garage, we found our new car sitting in a blood red puddle of transmission fluid. So I ran into the house and called my neighbor, and she came over in her pajamas with her van and took us to the airport. And long story short, we all made the plane. But 6 hours later, when we finally arrived in Hawaii and drove to our hotel, it was totally surrounded by fire engines. And yes, the hotel was on fire. And the second youngest in all of his 5 years of wisdom said, "Mom, it can't get any worse. It's got to get better now." And 2 days later, Hurricane E was struck. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But do any of you have emergencies? What kind of emergencies do you have? Let's just hear what kind of emergencies could come out of our lives as we live from day to day.
Sharon, we've had a suggestion that you could go full screen. I think you just have to click on the big screen and it'll go full screen, because we're looking at your presenter view right now. And if you could. Oh,
all right. Let's see if I can.
Full screen so we can see what you're saying or see what you're.
Yeah, we don't want the presenter view. Let's see. Alexis, can you help me get the presenter view off? I want to see the presenter view, but I want them not to see the presenter view.
Possible? Just go full screen or whatever.
Yeah, it is. She'll help me.
Okay, very good. Anyway, you can continue with your audio. Just well, I guess what the
So
Let's see, should we end the show and get it back out and get it back
well,
in?
do you have a second screen?
Because it always did this. It was always okay before. Should I end the show and bring it up as a different way?
Well, we can bring up the slides, not in presenter view, but then you won't have your notes.
well, maybe we have to just proceed.
I don't
Oh
need
yeah,
the notes. I don't need the
Goes.
notes.
Yeah, so if you don't need the notes, then that's just fine.
Okay, so what kind
Okay.
of things, let's see, is that one bring me through? Okay, so
Yep.
what kind of things happen? I've listed a few. Any other ideas? Power outages, flooding, earthquakes, hazard material accident, civil unrest, communication failures, sickness, injuries, death of a family member, terrorist or nuclear attack. Any other good ideas?
water leak
What
or
about?
Tornadoes.
Yeah, tornadoes is a big one for a lot of you.
Medical
What else?
issues. Medical issues.
Oh, medical issues all the time. Thanks, Ken. So those things happen. So where do we go for help? Well, we can go to the Red Cross, we can go to FEMA, we can go to the American Civil Defense Association. So there are places we can go, but we need to start really looking at each one of these emergencies. And as I was looking through the emergencies, I just thought, well, we have to kind of decide, are we going to stay where we are or are we going to evacuate? And if we're going to evacuate, we need a 72-hour kit. So I know that I bet I'm talking to the choir, but I'm sure that you're looking at having a 72-hour kit. If we can stay at home, that's the best solution. But if we can get a 72-hour kit and get some of these things in our kits, and it's all, everybody has to put what is meaningful to them in that kit. But don't forget looking at a copy of your wills and your insurance information and your emergency contacts. And so if you could get those things together, make copies of them, and then have them in a place where you can grab them. Don't take the originals, keep those in a safe fireproof place. But that's kind of where we can start as we get ready for our emergencies. And I look at these emergencies as kind of a probability times consequence. So we have to look at what's the probability of these things occurring, and if they occur, what's the consequence? So one without the other is just not going to be able to give us a full risk assessment. So as you're looking at each one of these things, let's look at what we do, even as far as making our 72-hour kit. Well, what's the probability I'll need this? What's the consequences if I don't have it? So look through each of these things. And then as we look through all of these emergencies, it just seems like the power outages brings the biggest problem to our daily life. And so I looked at the possible causes of power outages. And we looked at, brownouts. Well, they've been promising now that we will have brownouts this year. They've just curtained another nuclear power plant in Michigan, and we're not bringing anything online to replace these things. Lightning could take it out for hours or days. Wildfires. I know some of you have had wildfires, and it takes a long time, days to weeks to months to get your power back. Flooding, winds and tornadoes, severe earthquake can take a long time, and certainly terrorist attack. Can you think of anything else? Okay, are we thinking about EMP? Somebody's got to say that. What about an EMP? So if we had an EMP, then we could be without power for a long time. But what are the consequences then if we don't have power? We don't have any running water. Our sewage system backs up. Most of us are not in an area unless we have a septic tank where our sewage systems, they're run by computers. And so if we have power outages for any length of time, we're not going to have sewers. And we're certainly not going to have open stores. And on that Hawaii trip, we went to the store and just within an hour, there just was nothing left on the shelves. We grabbed a couple of things and ran back to see what we could do in the storm. And we did have a little radio that one by one, the radio stations went out and we had that tiny bit of food, but that was all. There's no emergency response from the police or fire or ambulance. And then, of course, there's no communications. So without communications, we don't know what's going on, how long it's going to happen, how long it's going to last, and what we can do to get help. And water is a huge problem. And so I would encourage all of you to get some really good storage containers. And we sell those nice little water bricks. They're nice. I don't know if some of you have those. I don't have them. I'm using 55-gallon plastic drums, but you've got to be able to prepare those drums properly. And we wash them out good with chlorine and rinse them good. The first you wash them with water and hopefully you're using the new 55-gallon drums, but we wash them out with chlorine and then we roll them around and put them upside down so it gets along around the bung area really good, and then pour that out until the next container, and then finally rinse them and then fill them with your hose. And you want to have a dedicated hose. And so I just went down to a camping store and bought a white dedicated hose for some neighbors that I had, and I already have one. Somebody said, "Can I borrow your hose?" Well, no, it's like borrowing your toothbrush. You want to keep that hose contained and in a safe place where you know it's not going to be dirty and not going to be used outside to be watering someone's lawn and laid down so that bugs and things can get in. But once we get that water stored, then it's great, but it's only going to last so long. And so when we run out of water, we need to know how to clarify water that we're going to find, and with paper filters and earthen filters and siphoning. And Jay has taught us a number of times about paper filters and earthen filters, but earthen filters, if you make those in a little bucket, you can actually filter some of the radioactive particles. So the beta particles in particular cling to the clay. So you put down a little bit of gravel in your clean bucket, and then you put in some clay and some toweling, and then you put another layer of gravel and clay and toweling, and you put that, and you poke some little holes around the bottom of your bucket, kind of like maybe a quarter size area where you can poke nail holes around that, and then it drips down into your cleaner container, and now you have clarification. And of course, then you have to purify it. And so whether you're going to take that clarified water, you boil it, or iodine crystals, or a real good filter, one of the nicer filters, or chlorine, whatever you have to do to make it pure. But water is really our limiting factor, and it's so important. And I highly recommend that you have at least a 55-gallon drum of water for each member of your family, and more if you possibly can. And then start looking around where you can get the water if you have to go look for water, and buy a good water filter. These little straws and things, they're great for a couple of uses, but you have to have a really good water filter, like a Catadine or some of those nice water filters, and they're a little expensive, but we really need it. And so then we look at sanitation, because the garbage man is not going to be coming. So we see that we all know that we separate our rubbish from garbage if we can, and put our paper and our glass and our metal in one area, and we could burn our paper and a lot of that rubbish. But garbage is a different problem. And when we have food and animal products or sewage products with human waste, we need to know how to take care of that. So these classes, we're hoping that we can teach this kind of class. And some of our coming Zoom meetings, we'll go into each one of these subjects and see if we can't do a more a longer presentation on them. But I live in a place where we have a lot of clay, and clay is hard to dig. And I suggest when you have an area that isn't real good digging, you go out and dig yourself a hole now while you can, dig it, and then fill it with something that's easier to take out, like sand or something that's easy to get out of that hole, so you can get that hole immediately when you need it. So, of course, we're going to see no open stores for food supplies. So we're going to want to have good food storage. And I'm sure, again, like I've mentioned, I'm preaching to the choir, but we need to have short-term foods and long-term foods. And our short-term foods, we're going to eat those first, our refrigerated foods and our freezer foods and our pantry foods in that order. But long-term foods, they aren't as easy because we have to prepare them. And so the long-term foods, dried foods, they last a long time, but they're not so easy to prepare. And so that long-term food storage, I would hope you're putting away rice, wheat, and beans. That's so inexpensive, and any two of those is a perfect protein. Someone said to me, well, beans is a perfect protein. Well, it's really not. You have to add rice and beans together to get a perfect protein. And it's going to be a little hard to get the meats during that time unless we're out hunting. But if we're hunting, those deer, they'll be gone very quickly if people are really hungry. And dried milk especially for our children, and legumes, and then certainly canned foods for shorter term. Our canned foods, but our number 10 cans of dried foods, like the freeze-dried foods, and oils. And oils are kind of hard to store because they don't have a long shelf life. And so I have found that storing coconut oil, and that's a wonderful oil, is a much better oil for me to store because it has such a long shelf life. And they'll say, oh, maybe 15, 20 years. But I've read places, if you get that real good coconut oil, like the virgin oil they sell at Costco, that could have a 25-year shelf life. And so that's a really good way to get your oils. I love cooking with olive oil and some of the other oils, but they really don't last that long for consumption. And so what are we going to do to prepare it? How are we going to prepare our food? And I hope that some of you will have some good ideas. Please comment when we're talking about it. But propane, that's kind of a short-term solution because you're going to have little propane bottles, or maybe your bigger canister, but you only can use that outside. And alcohol stoves are nice. We used to have them for sale on the store. I'm not sure if we still do, but an alcohol stove is nice because it only off gases with a little CO2 and water vapor. So there's very little carbon monoxide out of an alcohol stove, and you can use those inside. They don't smell real good unless you get a real good quality alcohol. But for a lot of years, Jay was able to get us kind of a poorer quality alcohol. Jay, what was that called?
It was isopropanol or isopropyl alcohol.
Yeah, and you got that at work.
Works nearly as well as the denatured drinking alcohol, ethanol, and it was really good. More recently, it is unfortunate, but the alcohol stoves have almost disappeared. They're not using them in the marine market anymore, and it seems like a lot of producers aren't producing alcohol type stoves anymore. You can still build one, and you can still buy the alcohol, but anyway, it's unfortunate. You there is the old just a quart paint can with a roll of toilet paper with the center cardboard roll taken out, and if you stuff that into a quart paint can, then usually you can get a pretty good a burner, I guess, that will work pretty good with essentially any alcohol fuel.
I've done that little alcohol can stove, and you just go down to the paint store and they'll sell you the new paint cans. You don't have to, don't use an old one, but like you said, you just stuff that toilet paper in there, you take the cardboard center out and stuff it in and put the alcohol in there. And of course, you'll have to give it some air to breathe. So you'll have to have a little grate of some kind over it so you can lift that stove or that pot away from it. But you can certainly bring some water to boil quite easily on that little stove. And if you bring water to boil, I have a nice little wide-mouthed, it's a thermos jug, a wide-mouth thermos jug. And if you put a cup of oats or rice or wheat in there and pour your boiling water in there in the evening, by morning, you just put the lid on it, and by morning you have your cooked breakfast. And certainly pressure cookers, I think you could bring a pressure cooker to pressure. You could bring it to the point of pressurization on a little alcohol stove, and you can put a whole day's worth of food in a pressure cooker and keep it hot for a long time. And this little solar ovens, we used to make those out of aluminum foil. I baked a bread and a cake in a little solar oven. And of course, coal and wood stoves are wonderful. We have one down on our alternate site, a nice little wood stove, but don't put coal in them unless they actually say that they're okay for coal, because coal burns a lot hotter. But if you're going to get one of those little stoves, try to find one that you can put coal in, because coal stores so well. We used, when I lived in Heber, we dug a hole and put coal in there and put straw around it and then buried it. And it lasted, it lasts forever. That's where, it comes out of the ground, you put it back in the ground, and you can have a lot of fuel with just coal in a coal burning stove. Charcoal's great, but you can only use it outside, and it does gather humidity quite easily. And of course, as we said, our pressure cookers and thermos bottles. Any other good ideas? A lot of ways we can think to cook maybe, but that's going to be a challenge if we don't have electricity.
Sun ovens,
Yes, Kenneth,
sun ovens,
tell me again.
sun ovens.
Oh yeah, those little solar ovens are really fun. And maybe on one of our meetings, we could show how to make one of those. It would be a fun project to make some of those solar sun ovens. Thanks, Ken. So
There's also some pretty good instructions in the former issues of the Journal of Civil Defense, and I would recommend that everyone look at the past issues of the Journal of Civil Defense, and you can pick up a lot of this information in detail.
Yeah, those are a lot of information in those, and I think we have a search area now too that goes by subject for a lot of those subjects. So now we're looking at emergency medical or police response. And,
butane stoves also work good. The little
Yeah,
butane stoves, they're cheap.
Yeah, they are. And of course, inside you want to be really careful. Any of the butane and propanes, if they leak, they pool on, that gas pools on the floor, and it's really hard to get it out. Especially, if you're underground, you don't want to use any propane or gasoline or butane, but the propane is heavier. The specific gravity is heavier than air, so it pools on the ground, and you can cause an explosion pretty easy. But they're great outside. So now let's look at no police or medical response. And so, are you learning some basic first aid? They're teaching it just a little different now. Alan, did you have comment? I saw your name came up.
No, I already did. I made the comment about the butane stove.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
But yeah.
But we really need to learn some basic first aid. And there are some things that are more important than others, but we're going to lose our life pretty quickly if we don't get air. And if we bleed out. And so we need to learn how to stop the bleeding in an emergency, and how to give CPR, and how to give the Heimlich. Have any of you had an experience giving CPR? It's quite a humbling experience.
Yes, I've had the experience. None of my victims have survived, and that's unfortunate, but most don't.
Yeah, most don't, but with when we are giving the first aid, if are able to get someone there, the ambulance crew fast enough, then sometimes they do survive. And I ran on the ambulance for quite a few years just as a volunteer up in Heber, and we did have people survive with some basic first aid. I mean, basic CPR. And if you can just keep that going until your ambulance gets there, a lot of times you can save them. But I think I've given CPR 4 times off the ambulance. Even I wasn't even on the ambulance. 2 people had drowned in Bear Lake. I gave CPR to them. One in a hotel room had had a heart attack. Another one was hit by a car in front of our home. And so, and the Heimlich, I mean, that's really a lifesaver there. I had to give Heimlich to a little child in church one day, and that works really good. But we need to learn those skills if we can do that, and we need to practice them. And so as we're getting our neighborhoods together and church groups, wherever we're meeting, we might offer them, have the Red Cross or someone come in and give a good CPR class, and build yourself a good first aid kit. I mean, I look sometimes, and I do have a couple of good first aid kits, but when I run first to just my first aid drawer, it's all in disarray. But we need to have some good first aid kits, and keep a good supply of over-the-counter medications. We need to have medications for, and some of that should go in our 72-hour kits as well. So we should look at the over-counter medications. They do have shelf life, of course, but we can rotate those.
This is Jim here. Could I just mention one thing about the CPR? Recently, my local church, they had somebody from the county come out and to teach, the basics of that. I planned on going, but I got sick right before, and I didn't want to get people infected. So they're going to do it again. And then some other members of the church, they knew how to do it too. So.
Well, that's really, I think it's really important that we do that. And it's really fun to know first aid and to be right there if someone needs help. And so communications is the next thing I wanted to talk about. And if we keep in a widespread emergency like EMP, if there's an EMP, then we're not going to have televisions, but our battery powered radios will certainly work. And our AM radios, if there's no transmitting going on in the country, that AM radio will reach clear to Europe. And so I would highly encourage you to keep a good battery AM radio, and if the antenna's down, they say that they're pretty safe from EMP, but I still wrap mine. I wrap them in aluminum foil 2 ways. I wrap them one direction and then I wrap them the other direction. We really don't know how bad that EMP will be if they do an EMP. We were simulating at 5,000 volts per meter, and you can imagine plugging your appliance into a 110 volt receptacle and getting 5,000 volts coming out. It's going to destroy it. But a lot of things are hardened pretty good. But now they're claiming that Russia has super EMP weapons that would give us 200 to 300,000 volts per meter. And so I think they were simulating it at 50,000 volts per meter, weren't they, Jay? Was it 5 or 50,000 volts per meter? But whatever it was, we really need to protect. Was it 50,000? We need to protect our equipment, our radio equipment. And so if you have some radios, some CB radios, whatever it is, make sure that you put them into a Faraday cage. You either wrap them in your aluminum foil, or you make a little Faraday cage out of a good metal garbage can with a good metal lid. And we suggested for a long time, and I think it's still true, that if we get about a 6-inch wide piece of metal screening and put that all the way around the perimeter of your garbage can, and then fold it over the top. So, you know, you have 3 inches inside and 3 inches outside, go all the way around that perimeter of your garbage can, and then force the lid on. Then you have a really good tight fit, and you don't get what we call an antenna effect. Some people are also taping it with some kind of a metal tape, but then it's hard to get in and out when you want to use your radios. But we're only going to have one chance at that. So you need to keep some kind of radios protected. And the CB radios, those old CB radios that the truckers had, they're a great radio. And with a little extra power, you can go a long ways on a CB. It's line of sight, but you can get, you can get some good reception out of that, and transmission, and family radios too, but they're not quite as good as the old CBs. And of course, any ham radios out there? Anyone do an amateur radio?
I do.
Oh, wonderful. And so
I'm with the San Bernardino County Emergency Communication Service.
oh, wonderful.
And I have provided emergency communications during earthquakes in communities totally cut off.
Well, it's such a wonderful service. And the amateur radios, now the 2 meters, the 2 meter rigs are really nice, but if we don't have a relay station, which probably would be gone in an EMP, if we don't have a relay station, then those are no different than a CB. So the 40 to 80 meter radios really, they, of course, and I'm just a baby ham. I don't know a lot, but when I did my amateur radio, I was working with the military out of Denver, and I was able to reach them fine on just a fairly, it wasn't a huge antenna, it was just a little inverted V that I directed directly towards Denver, and I was able to get them just fine. But the 40-80 meter does not require a relay station. And so you can get all the way to Europe with that 40 to 80 meter amateur radio. And so if you don't have one, find somebody that does. And then in Salt Lake a while back, we had a program where all of our friends got their family radios and their CBs, and they could go line of sight to one another. And then we would have our amateur radio, our ham radio operator, send out a message, and then he'd send it, and then the one that was close by, he'd get a message on his ham radio, he'd send it out on his CB, and then we'd see how far it would go and come back to him. But he can get the information from all over the world, where we can only get it within line of sight. So if you're able to reach into a ham radio operator and he has a good radio on the same frequency, a CB or whatever it is, that's really a nice way if you can get the cooperation of your community. And the other thing we can do if we're in a neighborhood is leave notes out for the rescuers. You can make signs and put a help sign out if you, and I'm not highlighting those, but you probably can see them anyway. The help signs, if you need help, you put that in your window, or if everything's okay, you put that in your windows. But we need to know, if we can be of assistance to our neighbors. And our flashlights with extra bulbs and batteries, make sure that you get both. And a deep cycle or a gel cell battery would run a lot of lights in your house if you just keep one charged. Low amperage lights can be hooked to that, and you can run lights in every room with just like little Christmas lights. Or generators and solar panels, of course, is a wonderful source of power. But I have a little 500K solar generator, and I keep my battery charged. But when I needed to, I could put out my solar panel, and I can't do a lot with 500 watts, but I can run some small things on that, and it just is nice to have that ability. And I have a little 2K generator in my garage, and but of course it's gas, and so unless you're someplace where you can store a lot of gas, that generator is not going to do us a lot of good. We'll run out of gas. But if you're storing gas, I would highly recommend that you store it in jerry cans, the metal jerry cans instead of the plastic cans, because the plastic does off gas some, and the jerry cans are a lot safer. So and then the generators, of course, if you have bigger ones, then I highly recommend the diesel generators, because we can keep our diesel fuel nice a lot longer. Of course, there's additives that we can put in them, but Jay, do you have diesel generator?
Yes, I do. And we do sell the Pride diesel treatment on the TACDA website, so you could look at that. But yeah, and it's good just to make, have perhaps a good filter, a good secondary means of filtering the diesel, because that's mainly what goes wrong with the diesel. It'll just start kind of reacting with itself, and maybe some biological activity inside the diesel if there's a little bit of water in there. But if you can filter all that out, it's usually pretty good diesel, even many years after you purchase it.
Well, in our solar panels, it's just great. I've heard that the solar panels are pretty hardy. I think, was it Generac or something claimed that they had solar panels that are EMP hardy, but I think most solar panels are pretty hardened, and our batteries are, but it's the inverters and the solar chargers and all of the equipment that runs that solar that's vulnerable to EMP. So if you're using solar, then make sure that you invest in another full set and keep that in a Faraday cage, so that you're not going to lose your ability to use your solar.
Sharon, I got a question. It's my understanding that LED bulbs, which are so popular today, are susceptible to EMP or solar storm. Can you comment on that?
Well, I have heard the same thing. And so I don't know. Jay, do you know if there were any simulations done on the LED lights?
No, I don't think we got that information for sure. Although I think LED lights, well, they tend to be relatively small, not a lot of collector area, which is an advantage. But it is a light emitting diode, and electronic components like diodes can be susceptible to EMP. So I would say there is a good probability, and if you have LED lights, you should probably store those in a Faraday cage as well.
And then maybe some of the older type, so that we can have light.
Yeah.
And they did a lot of simulations on the cars, on the vehicles, and Bron Chakotis was the one that did a lot of the simulations for the government. And he said that when he was doing the simulations, the older vehicles did real good and the new vehicles did real good. The ones in between didn't do as well. But he said that if they did go out, there was one that finally failed after they'd done 2 or 3 simulations on it. If you take the battery cables off the battery and discharge them, you can hold them together and make a little spark, or you can just wait until they discharge and then put them back on the car. He said that just waiting and discharging that reset the computerized ignition, and they were able to restart the car. So if you're caught.
Sharon.
Yes.
Sharon, Dave Gerber out in Utah.
Yes,
Just
Dave.
to be clear, you're talking about the leads you have removed from the battery and not shorting the battery connections themselves, right?
Correct. Yes, we're taking the leads off and then touching the 2 leads together. Don't explode your battery. So just touching the 2.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to make clear. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, and so if you find yourself, if there's an EMP and you're out on the freeway or in the road and there's a lot of people stopped and you can't start your car, you might try that. Hopefully that will do the trick. So when there's no fuel at the gas station, we better make sure that we're filling that gas tank and at least keeping it half full at all times. So kind of be aware of If you have to leave your location for an alternate site, see how much gas it takes you to do that and store enough gasoline that you can get there. I've heard that diesel is going to be real hard to get by the end of the summer. I hope that's not true because we have a lot of diesel vehicles, but make sure that you store a little gasoline and keep that tank half full. So now let's get down to what we can do to help our neighbors. How are we going to help them get through this? And I hate to say it, but hungry neighbors are probably the biggest threat we'll have. And so we want to see if we can encourage our neighbors to do the things that we're doing. And most of you watching today are already doing these things. So I would suggest if you are in a neighborhood that it's convenient, meet your neighbors and invite them to a potluck dinner. Ask them to join you in helping one another in an emergency, and organize a neighborhood watch. Get to know your neighbors and teach them the preparedness concepts. You might say, well, let's meet 2 or 3 times a year and see how many things you can teach them, see if they would be interested. Get to know them and offer your assistance while you're waiting for an emergency response personnel. You can do a lot of assistance to help your neighbors. And there's going to be a lot of people out there that need help. And hopefully they will have put away their food so they won't be that kind of a problem. But we want to be able to,
Sure.
Especially, yes, was there a comment?
Yeah, Sharon, Dave Gerber again.
Yes,
The one
Dave.
point that I make with my coworkers is there's virtually no difference regarding food storage. I'm civil service, and as you recall, and everyone on this meeting recall, we've had furloughs over the years. And because of the food storage, I never worried about feeding my family. And the analogy is a person may be between positions, for one euphemism, laid off, fired, and while they're looking for new employment, they can continue to feed their family. There is no concern. That's the one point I usually make. And oh yeah, throw in the zombie apocalypse for good measure, but
Yeah,
something something practical to think about as a what if.
Right. And of course, every emergency is not going to end in a full-blown emergency like an EMP or a war. You know, we can have earthquakes, or we can have all of those things we talked about, the winter storms, the tornadoes, all of those things could be short-term emergencies. So
Being between positions can be considered an emergency also.
Absolutely. And we were there as a family, and we ate our food storage for a whole year. And the kids hate dried milk to this day, and so do they hate venison. But we ate it, and we were thankful for it. And so in our neighborhoods, and some of you, I mean, I now live in a little neighborhood, and I have close neighbors. I didn't used to live on the farms, but we have close neighbors now. And so if something happened here, I'd want to help account for the condition of those neighbors in the neighborhoods, and to provide some temporary relief and fortify social, emotional, and spiritual strength. And so we can do this if we meet with those neighbors and learn who they are. And then if we have met them and we've been able to get to know them, then when the emergency response teams do come, we can give them an idea of the location, the description of the emergency, and how you can be reached. And you need to be able to give them the names of the injured and the missing and the next of kin, and the description of the property damage and assistance that you have needed. If you call in, if everyone's calling in, then it's such a jumble. But if one person's calling in and saying, my neighborhood at this address, and this is what we need, and this is the problems we have, and then it's really helpful to our emergency response teams. But you already need to have met with those people. You need to know who their names are. And if they're willing to get their information, get something about them, their next of kin, and any contact information for people that are out of state. So encourage them to get their semi-car kits and to get their, and have a little class on food storage and what kind of things they can store in their water storage and sanitation, like we've talked about, and the CPR and first aid and emergency communications and alternative power sources. Those are all things that we should all know, but people here already have thought about it and know it, but a lot of our neighbors don't even think about it. And so if we can encourage them to get those things, to learn those things, they seem to want to know if you offer it. And so help your neighbors to become part of that long-term solution. And so I passed out a neighborhood paper on how you can gather your neighbors and how you can make that work. But the preparation for tomorrow is preparation you have to make today. There's not time to prepare it once there's an emergency. And so just like that little duck walking along with her ducklings, we never know when there might be an emergency that's going to occur. But that's my basic preparation. And I just thought I would leave 10 or 15 minutes that we could talk about maybe emergencies that you've already had, solutions that you have had, experiences you've had with helping your neighbors and maybe helping one another get through these emergencies. Any thoughts?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Mike Saflita, and I did some work with the LDS Church to find out who was prepared and who wasn't. And I verified that when I came back to Utah. And the church itself indicates that between 5 and 7% of the population is prepared. That's a pretty low number, but it's their number. It's also what I experienced in New York. Outside of the LDS Church, the percentage is 1 to 2%. People do not like this message. I did some other research. I come up with 20 reasons why people just don't want to be prepared.
Yeah.
It's a tough sell.
It is. And putting away food, it's hard to rotate it. If you got long-term food, then it's easier. You know, we can get food now, the freeze-dried foods that'll last 20, 25 years, but short-term foods, and we do need some of those. I mean, we're not going to be preparing our long-term foods immediately. We need enough to get by for 2 or 3 weeks just with canned foods that we can just open the can and eat it, and MREs and things like that. But you're right. People are very hesitant. They don't want to think about it. It's just uncomfortable for them to even think about it. But if we nudge them a little, I was very pleasantly surprised in my own neighborhood, and we met with a little barbecue and had a little potluck dinner. And I was very pleasantly surprised about how many people really were willing to talk about it and said they'd like to meet again. And you just meet together and you get a chairman, vote for a chairman, and vote for someone that'll call the meeting and take turns calling the meeting and see what kind of things they want to learn, and then see how much information they're willing to share. I always hesitate and never do ask them, well, would you be willing to share your food? No, of course, you know, people don't want to be asked that. But in a short-term emergency, if we had some supplies that were ready, if we did this in a neighborhood a couple of years ago, and one of the families said, well, I can keep supplies for a couple of meals, and I'll assign the neighbors to keep enough supplies that we could prepare meals so that the men and the strong teenagers could go out and help, because we had a lot of flooding in our neighborhood. And another one said, well, I can dig a hole because I have a good little backhoe. I'll dig a hole and prepare an outdoor toilet. And I'll keep a tent and things there that the 8 neighbors that we had, we could use that outside toilet. And another one said, well, what if we were gone and the children were at school and no one was there to get the children and take care of them? And she said, she suggested that we write up a paper with all our names and our signatures and what children were in the different grades, and hand them to the principal. And if the principal has it, and tell him to file that. Don't put it on your computer because we don't have power, you won't know. But these two people in our neighborhood have our permission to go gather our children and bring them home and tend them. And then you try to encourage your teenagers and your children in the neighborhood program they can help with a lot of things. They could help with tending the children and playing games with them. So there were a lot of things that one of the neighbors said, well, he said, I was a contractor and I could go around and do a survey. If there's an earthquake, I could survey and see what kind of damage was done. And if your house, I don't think your house you shouldn't go in it, then I'll tell you, let's not go in there. And another one came up with an idea and said, well, let's put a little note outside in a little a bottle, and we'll put, or in some waterproof can with paper and a pencil. And so if we had to leave the house in an earthquake, then you know where we've gone. We can find your note, and we'll tell each other where we're putting our notes, and you can find it so you don't go in my house if there, and put yourself in danger of going and seeing if I'm injured. And so we put little note keeping places outside. And everybody had a good idea of something they could do to help one another in that kind of an emergency. Because like I said, there's a lot of emergencies that are not going to require a full lockdown. And neighborhood watch is extremely important in a lot of our neighborhoods. And so if we're having any problems, we could take turns patrolling the neighborhood and report to the police that way. But any ideas on how we can help our neighbors?
Sharon, I think it might be worthy to put a plug in to have a fire extinguisher or two.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful, wonderful idea. Yes, always keep your fire extinguisher and know where it is. And if you can put one in your car, we came across, my son and I were driving, and we came across someone with a car fire, and we didn't have our fire extinguisher, but someone luckily did. They stopped and were able to bring it from their own car. But after that, I thought, wow, we need to keep a fire extinguisher in our car as well as at home.
I took some fire extinguisher training, and the very first thing you want to do is make sure you've got an exit route before you go in for the fire, because if it doesn't work, you could be in deep hurt. So
Boy,
plan how you're going to get out of there if it doesn't work.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, the most important thing is that we get out and we call for help rather than try to put it out ourselves. But small fires, you know, if we can control it, like you said, they start up very fast and they get out of control very quickly. So we need to know our exits, and we need to practice with our families. And they used to talk about that all the time. Well, where are we going to meet outside? I mean, half of them go outside one way and half on the backyard and somebody on the side yard, and we don't know where they are, and there's a lot of noise and confusion. Have a place outside where you're going to meet so that you know that if everybody's out, so you don't have to go in looking for someone that's already out. And when you go on vacation, do the same thing. We had all decided every time we took a vacation, if anything happened, we would meet here. And so if you get separated and there's a problem, you know that you can always find a family member where you decide to meet.
Tina, and she was down at Mandy's. Yeah. And Mandy goes through all this with her patients.
Kate Billings, one of the suggestions that was made was the little solar lights that everybody has in their gardens.
Yeah.
You can bring them inside when the power's out so that you have light. And
oh, wonderful idea.
It's already up and running. You don't have to wait for the next day to get some solar panels working.
Sure, that's a great idea. I have a little flashlight that is, it plugs into the wall, and when the power goes out, it automatically comes on. And so I can find it in the dark. If I'm not right by my flashlight, I can find that one, and it's always there plugged into the wall. But those solar lights, that's a really good idea. I hadn't thought of that.
I have a quick question about, you know, getting your neighbors together. Would you be concerned about if you got together a class, then now all your neighbors know you're a prepper and they know you have supplies.
Yes, I would. And I think that we have to be careful to, we can share information, but not information about what we have. No, if we want to encourage the other ones to help us in giving classes and look for ideas, but I think we should be concerned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other
Anybody who's into amateur radio want to comment on what they have done or would like to do to protect their amateur rig from EMP or solar storms?
I put mine in, and I still have it there. I put mine in my that garbage can, but I did the lid that way with the metal screening, but I also wrap them in toweling so they're not touching the sides of the can. And you've got to be careful about grounding cans also, because that grounding wire can pick up EMP. So there's some people say you should ground, some people say you shouldn't. In our shelters, of course, our metal shelters that we have, they're already grounded, so we don't have to ground anything there. But I think Ron Chakota said we should not. If we have a metal can like that and we have the lid on it, that we should not take a grounding wire out to the ground. He said that it's too much danger of picking up the EMP in grounding wire.
I have lined my garbage can with cardboard.
Yeah, just as good. That's great.
Top and bottom. Then I still put the items I want to store and wrap them in bubble wrap and then overwrap them with aluminum foil, so it's like a double protection.
That sounds wonderful, because we have one chance, like we said before. There's not two chances in an EMP. So you did the garbage can, then lined it with the cardboard, then wrapped them in aluminum foil, and then in toweling also after the aluminum foil. Is that?
Well, no, I wrap my stuff in bubble wrap.
Oh, bubble wrap. Bubble wrap.
And then overwrap with aluminum foil and put those inside the metal garbage can that's protected.
Okay, so the bubble wrap was first, and then the aluminum foil over the bubble wrap.
That's right. That's what I do.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
But the problem with protected radios, I have one HF transmitter and one VHF transmitter, and they're tied into grounds and grounding wires and so forth. So it's not practical to unhook them all every time and put them inside the garbage can.
Well,
so I'm wondering, does anybody else have any ideas on how they can protect their amateur radio rigs?
Well, and again, and I did that too, but I was only using mine once a week. You're probably using yours daily. But I undid everything and put them in the can every time. And of course, if you can have two of those and keep one in the can, but you're limiting your exposure if you can take them out, use them, and put them back in the can. And it was a pain, but I was consistent every time. But there are some real nice filters. Jay, do you know of any filters? The EMP filters, but of course they're on the outside of a room that's clad in metal. We put our big EMP filters on our metal lined concrete shelters when we designed that EMP rooms, but I don't know.
I don't know of anything that, if you have a radio set up with that antenna, then it's vulnerable to EMP. That's just the way it is. You could, put your antenna in a metal conduit, and then just put a metal cap over that. Kind of protect your radio that way. I guess if you're in a shelter or some other protected area, but basically, it's if you got a radio in a usable position, then it's vulnerable.
Yeah, I think a lot of us radio amateurs are going to be very disappointed.
Yeah,
There is an EMP or a solar storm, and we're going to find our radios do not work.
yeah.
It's fried.
And your antenna, of course, is going to pick up the most of it. But in our steel shelters, I was transmitting, when I was working with Denver, I was transmitting from my steel shelter. And so I had an antenna wire that came down through a connection. And when I wasn't using it, I rolled it up and kept it away from the radio and put the end of it in a glass canning, like a glass canning bottle. I put the end of it in there, so if there's a spark, it didn't start a fire. But if you roll it, it's not going to pick up the same amount of EMP as if it's in a line. Roll it up and keep it away by 6 or 8 feet from any of your equipment. So if you can at least take off that antenna wire, disconnect it from the antenna and keep it separate.
May I suggest a reference, which is the best that I've ever found? And it's a 2-volume set called the Civil Defense Manual, and it's at civildefensemanual.com. The reason I suggest that is the guy has drawn in experts like Jerry Evanuelson, installed Faraday cages. He spent his life doing that, and he devotes an entire chapter to how to set up Faraday cages that work.
Wonderful. Let's see.
It's an excellent set of books, but I think it costs $120.
I just bought them. I haven't read them yet, but I just barely got them. But I wondered if we shouldn't have those on the TACDA store, because they really did look like a good manual.
I've been dabbling in preparedness for 40 years, and that's the best source of information I have ever seen. It's comprehensive, and he often draws experts to write individual chapters, like Emanuelson did on the EMP protection. It's really stellar. And Emanuelson's got his own website if you want to go do that, and it's shown in the book. But anyway, civildefensemanual.com.
What's Emanuelson's website, do you know?
Oh, yeah, just a minute. Futurescience.com.
Okay, we ought
All
to,
one word, futurescience.com.
okay, we ought to put a reference to that on our site. But
He's an extraordinary guy. I've seen his stuff over the years, and he's very knowledgeable.
Well, that's really exciting. We have gone over our hour now, Jay, so if you want to keep going, we're fine, but I'm fine, but I have provided all of the program that I had prepared.
Maybe just time for 1 or 2 more questions. What is anybody have anything right at this point?
Yeah, Jay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, on the civil defense manuals, Jim Phillips, who recently presented, also does his weekly meetings. He actually was an expert that was featured in that manual, and he offers them on his website at a big discount for members only. So you can get quite a bit less expensive. Go to jimsway.com, and for members, you could sign up for a month, 1 month or 2 months, just $5, something like that a month. And you can get a huge discount on.
What's that website again?
jimsway.com.
And he is just amazing. He gave a presentation just recently, but he just has so much knowledge and is continually giving classes in his community. And in that civil defense manual, we also have, Paul and I have a little, Paul is the one that put it in, but he tells about how to build our corrugated steel pipe shelters in that manual. So if you have any interest in building a shelter, it's in that manual as well.
When everybody's all done, I can't figure out how to get an image of me. Not that that matters a lot, but I got everything else, but I don't seem to have an image of me. I did last time, but I don't know why it's not this time.
I don't know if I haven't. Well, I think anybody, you just have to start your video down at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah.
Start what?
Just touch the video at the bottom of the screen because he's probably
Yeah,
has a
if you
little-
go down the bottom of the screen, it should have a little bar there, and there's an unmute and a start video type.
Okay.
Or a button.
You got it now.
Did you?
There you
Oh,
are.
there I
Did
am.
you-
Look at that.
I was gonna suggest throwing a virgin CD into the volcano as a sacrifice to the Zoom gods.
The camera lit up too, so I guess I'm tuned in. Thank you. I appreciate that.
This is Jim here. Those notes that you went through, is there any way I could get that?
We do have the, that presentation was, I think on the advertisement for the meeting. I think we have our neighborhood presentation there, then the notes there.
Okay.
Yes, they will be there. Just go to the TACDA.org website, and it may take us a few days, but we'll have the presentation and these slides up, as well as, the audio recording of this meeting.
Well, that's great. Okay.
Thank you, Sharon. You did an excellent job.
Yeah.
Well, you're very welcome. Well, you just get so many good ideas from people. It's just such fun.
Oh, yeah.
to
Power
go
of
to
many.
classes on preparedness, because I never go to a presentation that I don't learn something from someone else. Never give one that I don't learn more than what I give.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Good presentation.
You're
Yes,
so very welcome.
yes, thank you.
And if there's things that you want to learn in our presentations, please let us know, because we can find someone to give a presentation on most any subject. And if you have the ability to give presentations, we'd like to know, what you might have to offer as well. We can't use everyone, but because we want to make sure that we're getting what we need. But
There's a lot of information and misinformation on effective Faraday cages. You mentioned grounding, not grounding.
right.
Do we have someone out there that's an expert that can make a presentation on that?
We can find someone.
I think that'd be great.
We did have Bron Scotus. He passed away, and I don't know that we have a real good connection at this point, but we'll see what we can find. See if we can find some person.
Yeah, that would be good.
Anyway, we appreciate everyone's participation. We'll go ahead and end it tonight. And please, if you have additional contributions or comments or whatever, you can send it to the email info@tacda.org, or just go to the website, and I think you can communicate with us there. So anyway, we certainly appreciate everyone's attendance, and we invite you to invite someone else to the meeting next month, and we'll encourage you to keep busy and in preparing, and look forward to seeing you again on the next meeting.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Jim.
everyone.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening.
Jay, and thank you, Sharon.
You're welcome.